Hello and welcome to The Mortgage Conversation with Saffron for Intermediaries. I'm your host, Tony Hall. We're joined today by two wonderful guests, one from the world of AI development and the other an award-winning broker, and I'll get them to introduce themselves shortly. We also see a welcome return to Phil Lawford, who missed us last month, so we're glad to have him back. Before we start, I just want to say that we're recording this on Wednesday, the 16th of April, and it will go live on the 1st of May. So any of the topics that we talk about in this fast-moving market will be up to today's date. The other thing is, all the views and comments that we make today are our own and not necessarily of our employers. So, let's meet our guests. Welcome, Luke. If you could just tell the listeners who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so Luke Loveridge, I'm the founder of PropFlow. We're an AI platform to help particularly lenders and brokers and estate agents engage their customers in retrofit, basically. So it's a retrofit one-stop shop. And we were the first such one of those platforms in a mortgage lender, broker and estate agent.
Excellent, and we'll unpick that a bit more as we go through. And over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I'm Dan Gracie. I'm a mortgage advisor. I deal with large mortgages, complex mortgages, and I work with lenders looking at their propositions and expanding things in the market.
Fantastic, thanks, Dan. And finally, Phil, everybody knows you, but a quick hello and what you do.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Phil Lawford. I'm the National Account Manager at Saffron for Intermediaries. I look after our intermediary distribution relationships with mortgage clubs and networks.
Excellent. Right, shall we get stuck in? So before we get on to our main topic, I think it would be remiss to not talk about the current madness in the world with trade wars and pricing, etc., etc. So kind of a broader one. How will this US trade tariff impact our market? Do we see it as an opportunity? Are rates going to change? Is it going to impact consumer confidence and tilt us the wrong way? What do you think, Dan? Let's come to you first.
I think you've started us off with probably the hardest question. It's largely dependent on a very volatile human being.
True that.
So what I think the effects I think it might have today could be very different tomorrow. I don't know. Inflation could come down, inflation could go up, that could impact interest rates, that can affect people's ability to make a decision. We often see, I'll have a stable market, whether it goes up or down. I like stability, so that my clients can make an informed decision that they think will last, not a decision that might be old in a month's time.
Or a day's time.
That's my absolutely. And that's probably my biggest concern at the moment, is that it's hard to talk a client through their ideal mortgage proposition when things are changing so fast.
Yeah. No, challenging. I mean, Phil, you always say this market is built on confidence and stability. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember back in December when we were giving our wish list for 2025, our New Year wish list. One of the items, I think the top of my wish list, was I wanted a boring year in terms of the market because of, as I've said before, and as you've alluded there, the market's like certainty and predictability, and businesses want that as well. If you're going to plan to invest in, a factory, whether you want to plan to move manufacturing somewhere, how can you plan in the current environment when things are changing so rapidly, even almost by the hour? So that's a concern. I suppose the one good bit of certainty we saw was that bond markets still seem to rule the roost. So we saw some backing down last week, and that was more due to bond markets than anything. And that was almost a repeat of the Truss government debacle, where the bond market sort of dictated, which way the outcomes really. So confidence, the confidence is the biggest sort of factor, and so there is that worry that is there going to be any contagion from US markets if the US market, if people are less confident in the dollar, Will that affect us negatively, or will it affect us positively? Is sterling a safe haven? I don't know, but I think one positive is that this is a big year for refinancing. So regardless of consumer confidence about, there might be concerns about job stability, there's something like £379 billion worth of refinancing this year in the UK market. So I think that's the good factor for mortgage brokers, in that customers need to be looked after and consumers need good, sound mortgage advice, and that's not going to change. So that is the one certainty factor we've got to look forward to and hang on to, that customers need really good advice. So whether rates go up or down, you're going to need advice on your maturing finance needs. So that's, I think that's a fact we've got to hang on to, really.
Cool. So on this same thing, Luke, for you then, thinking about retrofitting and the cost of doing that, do you think that the trade war could make building materials more expensive?
I think ironically it could have the opposite effect.
Okay.
So if China's not able to do business with the US anymore, where's all of that stock going? It's going to be a buyer's market. So it could actually end up lowering prices for solar panels, heat pumps, all of those materials.
Okay.
So that could actually be a positive and actually help to increase the take up of this stuff. But obviously, if oil prices remain low, then the business case to retrofit is weaker because energy is cheaper. So, but it's temporarily. And I think the key thing here is, we currently import 37% of our energy still, and that's leverage. Okay, so that it's exposed to the Ukraine war. If Houthis do something in the Red Sea, trade wars. So there's a core driver here that we need to take more of a long-term view and not just, it's cheap energy at the moment, then let's not do the retrofitting. It is, renewables and energy efficiency will make us more resilient as a country and less exposed to all of these global uncertainties. And I suppose just to touch on sort of the general market as well, I think the key thing is what's within our control. And when I say our control, like the government's, again, if we can be more stable and predictable as a country, actually could that leverage in more inward investment because we're seen as more of a safe haven. So I think it could, if we play our cards right, be more of a positive. And if the government has got a number of regulations and promises that they've made, if they can stick to those, again, that's within their control, right? So
it's a worry, isn't it? Because certainly since last November, and that seems to be trickling across the pond, it almost seems to be a bit of a dumbing down or down on anything green or eco, net zero. It seems to be taking a bit of a hammer, and it seems to be an easy target.
But it's not a long-term view. So like net zero is an easy target because it's got quite political.
Yes.
And we are legally obliged to meet net zero by 2050, and we need to do that by retrofitting properties.
Yeah.
But I don't see that as a core driver. The core fundamental tangible driver I see is energy security. We import 37% of our energy. We need to lower that. But also the cost of living. So this month, April, energy bills have increased by more than what was expected. So I think that is actually the two core drivers for the government and for the country. Essentially social and energy security. That's how I see it. Net zero is like a happy side product, I would say.
Yeah. No, it's funny though, isn't it? Because the amount we import our energy when we're sitting on new natural gas fields that are huge and we're not using them. We don't have to have this external reliance.
Exactly.
I think it's a different podcast.
I think we sell ours.
But they found loads under Lincolnshire, haven't they? Load of gas pockets.
We're not allowed to tap it.
And we're not allowed to tap it, but we'll bring it in and charge people more. Anyway, we could talk for hours on that subject, but let's get on to what. So thanks for that. We will come back to that confidence factor later, I think. Now we're on to our main topic, which we have rather nattily titled "It's Not You, It's MEES." Right? Okay, so for our viewers, MEES stands for the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards, which the government is currently in consultation with with everybody in the know. So the aim of this consultation is to seek views on the government's proposals to raise the minimum energy efficient standards for privately rented homes in England and Wales by 2030. So that's the what we're going to talk about, these standards, and obviously we've got a perfect person here with Luke in terms of what his business does. So Luke, do you want to tell us kind of what's the main purpose of this, and obviously the biggest thing, and we'll come to Dan's view on this later, is if landlords don't comply with this, there's potential fines for them, or other ways of exiting the business. So what's the main purpose of all this?
So yeah, like those three main drivers I mentioned before, like net zero on the surface, is we've got a legally binding target there. The government needs to, and we need a retrofit to meet that target. I think we have to do like 80,000 retrofits per month, and we're currently doing like 18,000. So we need to accelerate that. But really, it's around that energy security and cost of living. So for me, those underlying trends are not going to go away. And like the cheapest form of energy is the stuff that you don't use, right? And there's other benefits as well. So, you know, if you've got solar panels on your roof, you're essentially pre-purchasing 25 years of electricity. So you've got more stability in bills. You're probably less likely to go into arrears. So it's more stable energy system. More money in the pocket. But in terms of what these proposals are, they're trying to get it up to EPC-C for new tenancies by 2028. For all tenancies by 2030. So by the time these are confirmed, it's not a huge amount of time actually. No. So 2 years and then another. Yeah. And I think critically, these new proposals are including not just the private rented sector, but also social housing and short-term lets, so holiday lets. Yeah. And holiday lets is interesting because obviously they would be on the 2028 deadline because new tenancies, but they wouldn't have been exposed to minimum energy standards before. Yeah. So there's probably a lot of education needed on this as well. So they might not have been brought up to that original standard, which is already in place. But there's also another effect of this, which is if there's more homes needed to be fitted by these deadlines, that's going to cause a huge strain on the supply chain. And I think I was talking to an estate agent a while back, and they said they had a similar issue with sort of the electrical inspections, the ICRs, where it got to the deadline and you either could not find an electrician to do the inspections and the remedial works, or it costs like 3 times more. So I think there's an issue there which is building up. And the fines for non-compliance currently proposed is about 30,000. There are exemptions, and they're proposing some more exemptions to expand it. So yeah, they're making it potentially more difficult or more stringent, but they're also offering some more exemptions as well. So like affordability, they're proposing, so might be able to reduce that 15 grand sort of maximum cost for landlords down to like 10,000. So there's some flexibility there as well that they're proposing.
The exemptions is really interesting. I wondered if there would be, because currently you've got much older properties can be exempt, grade listed properties can be exempt, but particularly with the holiday lets, these are often larger, older houses, lots more areas, far more difficult to retrofit, and I wonder where the exemptions will hit. So I think because there will be people who just cannot do this.
Yeah, so I think there will be a number of exemptions for holiday lets, it feels like, because listed buildings, difficult to retrofit. I think there will be some exemptions there, but then if there are some bit like holiday lets which can get exempt, and they're not aware of this regulation, they could get caught out. So there is definitely an awareness piece needed specifically for holiday lets, I think.
I mean, sorry Phil, you go for it.
Are we talking about this enough? I mean, we know a bit about it because we work in the industry and it impacts what we do. But in the wider world, we're not having that conversation.
No,
it's just not.
No, but the problem is because it's still not. It's still consultation. It's very hard to because you know the original consultation back in 2020 for all this, you rip all that up and start again. So I think but there is an impact to the the PRS sector, which we'll come back to in a bit, because landlords, that's our topic number 3. There is an impact to this, but for me, a couple of things. And we'll come on to this, but the first thing is Paragon have done some research on this to hit that deadline. 5,600 properties per day need to be retrofitted. All right. So the challenge is these deadlines are not.
Yeah.
They're not practical. So let's be sensible with this. And isn't there some stat by something like 2042 this will have naturally happened anyway? It's something like that. I don't know. So,
I think that's the grid, like
that
decarbonisation
that's
of the
it.
grid.
Yeah.
But that's we're going to still have a lot more energy demand on the grid, so we still need to be more efficient in terms of the properties.
So in terms of the new metrics, so obviously this is linked to EPC and that EPC reform that's planned for 2026, etc. So the planned new metrics are assessing the energy performance of the building based on fabric performance, smart readiness, and the efficiency and emissions of the heating system. Are they because we've talked about those, but I'm not sure if those metrics have been defined at any point at this stage.
Personally, I think it should be much more simplified. Like, what are the government actually trying to achieve here? And I think the majority of homes to reach that C rating, unless you're sort of like a mid-terrace flat, it's going to be like solar panels. It's going to be least disruptive. It's a proven technology. There's a proven ROI on like solar panels, and there will be some other sort of sort of low-hanging fruit, light bulbs, loft insulation, etc. But like, what are they actually trying to achieve? And for me, I think the government should do a list of improvements and sort of like, you should do these rather than having all of these other metrics, which starts to confuse things. And at that point, you can actually sort of start cracking on with it. You don't have to wait for these 2026 reforms. You can just start cracking on with it. So, and in terms of I just want to link back to the first question as well, actually, because we did an analysis on the previous proposals where under those proposals, it would actually there'd be a net cost to the economy of about 5 billion. But if they actually supported landlords to go beyond and actually make it an effective retrofit, so not just a solar panel, which would just be a waste of money, not doing much, it would actually be a net positive about 5 billion to the economy. So it depends on how the government works this, but there could be a net loss or a net gain. So I think it is really crucial and particularly landlords and brokers as well, to feed into this consultation to give their view about how to make it practical and impactful rather than just a box ticking exercise.
There's a whole group of people who get affected by this who are never mentioned, and that's the yet to be landlords. You find out what these measures are that you can take to improve your home when you get an EPC rating. Homeowners don't get EPC ratings. Occasionally when you buy property, one's provided, but you don't look at it because you're not a landlord and you don't need to. But so many of my clients are now are now letting their former home. For whatever reason, they couldn't sell it. They've become an expat. I deal with loads of expats. They want to acquire another home. And they didn't buy a house with a view to it being lettable and EPC efficient. They bought the house that they like. It might be older. It might be very inefficient. You don't mind so much if it's your home. When they want to let that home out or sell it to a landlord, they're going to get really caught out. So, yes, we need to help landlords. We need to help brokers as well. Obviously, I think so. But this message should be going out to homeowners.
Definitely.
Absolutely. The simple ways to improve your home, jackets on boilers, on tanks. There's lots of things you can do. But you're not finding out about your own home.
I also think I think it should be framed as an opportunity for brokers to provide additional advice and added value to their clients, potentially making some revenue if they're sort of recommending contractors or passing on to and we're one platform that does that. There's others, but also for the landlord. Again, I think it should be a positive. Like, what's the value increase in the property? Can it defend the value, make it more sellable? Can you get more yield from it? Can you actually attract higher quality tenants? Can you make your current tenants more resilient so they're not less likely to go into arrears? And that's not even touching upon the mortgage side of things. So just to mention, like TMW, for example, if a landlord, if it's an A to C rated property, they allow a higher LTV, I believe, of about 85%. So, and there's a number of other, sort of cashbacks, discounts, etc. So I do think that when you sort of start to stack it up, the benefits start to become like a no-brainer. So I think, but we need to sell that and sort of create that awareness.
I don't want to jump ahead because I've seen we're going to talk about this,
That's
but
fine.
the mindset of a professional or large portfolio landlord can be quite different to the mindset of, say, a hobby or accidental landlord. The professional landlord, if they find out they've got to make some EPC improvements, fine. It's going to have to do it anyway. I'll get it done. Someone who's just got one buy-to-let, and to get the mortgage deal they now need to go and make all these improvements, is very costly. And it's a surprise, and it's not something that had been factored in.
And that's where, because we've obviously seen a trend to more professional landlords anyway, could that speed it up? So, I don't think it would necessarily be a reduction in the sector, but I just think it would be accelerating a change in demographic within the sector potentially.
I contributed to a piece in one of the big mortgage publications recently about a shift more towards US style, I'd say German style, professional landlords, corporate landlords, away from the hobby landlords, because it's just becoming too difficult.
Yeah. Before because we're gonna talk about that, because I would have done some research that would tie in exactly to what you just said there, Dan. But Luke, opportunity to talk about PropFlow a little bit in terms of, we've talked about people understanding what they can do and how they can do it. Do you just want to talk our listeners through how that works from your perspective?
Yeah, so essentially our platform has 3 tools. The first one is essentially an individual digital property report. So a broker, so we work with, for example, Habito, Crystal Specialist Finance, Green Mortgages, which they can send to their customers, feature on their website. They can check, what the pros and cons are, the value add to the property around doing retrofit, what the works could be, and then they can get direct quotes from those suppliers. And we do get a commission on that, which we split with the broker in this instance, for example. And we also negotiate discounts for the customers as well. So it's a win-win-win, basically. So that's sort of like the basic one. But we also have like a portfolio analysis tool as well, so for corporate landlords. So the first piece is, increasing the awareness of customers, but also understanding where the gaps are and the risks are. And then if they can get grants, for example, or they just want to crack on and do the works, they can do. So it's all nice and streamlined. So we were one of those platforms, like I said, in a mortgage lender, broker, and estate agent. And I think the key bit is firstly is that awareness side of things, but then making it as easy as possible going forward on all of the other parts, getting quotes, works done, etc. We did do a bit of research where essentially 60% of people wanted. Actually, no, higher than, sorry, more like 80% wanted a combination of a digital assessment and in person. So we do also offer through partners energy assessments, retrofit assessments as well. So if they do want a bit more hand holding, they can do that. And again, I think that's quite an easy, quick win. If the landlord or wants to understand what their compliance issues are, they can look on the digital report to get an idea. And then if they want more hand holding, more detail, they can get an in-person report as well. So yeah, that's where we are, and we've got quite a few signed up, and we're even like going through MasterCard, for example. So really starting to ramp up, and really we're just passionate about, like I said, it's like an energy security thing. It's not just about meeting net zero. Happy sort of side benefit. It's like, how can we as a country? Essentially, it comes down to sovereignty. Like the more energy we import, the more leverage, or the more exposed we are to overseas developments. So for me, it's like, how can we get people to live in a more comfortable and cost efficient home, essentially? No,
thank you for that. I think our listeners will value that. I certainly did, and I think one of you mentioned it earlier. It's all about education, and I think it's changing that dial, as you say, around forgetting this. It's about energy security for us as a nation. I'm interested, before we move on from this little bit. I mean, Dan, from your perspective as a broker, have you got clients coming to you worried about this, talking about this?
It's not. I deal with very complex mortgages, so all my clients come to me with a concern about, can they get a mortgage? How can they get a mortgage? How can we look around the situation and find the right solution? For anyone renting a property, this is a big concern if it's not a very modern built property. And most towns in the UK, apart from new build towns, are full of older properties. that I mean I alluded to earlier, but they are hard to retrofit. I live in a 120-year-old house, and we blocked our chimneys up and did all the things you're supposed to, and suddenly the house isn't breathing and there's damp coming, and it's not quite as straightforward. Some of these houses don't want to be modernised. And we like our old houses, it's our history, so that's an issue. I've digressed. They do come worried about it. It's a cost, it's a concern, and it makes it harder to find the right mortgage when you've got to focus on that issue rather than which would normally be the right lender. This suddenly becomes front and foremost of the search sometimes. Just finding a lender who fits the client's EPC or the client's property's EPC profile.
And on the contrary to that, then, how many clients come to you and are absolutely clueless about any of this?
I think most clients who have a let property don't have this at the front of their mind until they've been through it. It's normally a surprise to someone in the first instance that they have to have an EPC report. It's a shock when they realise how much they might have to do to get the best rate. Or as you alluded to, I discovered this the other day. I was looking at a rate for a client at a high loan to value percentage, and it was only available from EPC A to C.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that wasn't advertised. That was a shock to me with that lender. I didn't know they were doing that.
We're just on there's potentially creating a two-tier mortgage system here, because this was on residential, but Halifax, obviously one of the biggest lenders, they before Christmas said they would lend more on A and B rated properties, but less on F and G rated properties. So you're starting to create a dynamic between those energy efficient and inefficient properties there. So not just how the positive, like you can borrow more, or it's actually you might actually be able to not be able to borrow as much as you can or you want. So yeah.
And this is okay if you're a normal person in a normal situation getting a fairly normal mortgage. You've got the choice of the market, and so you can pick through the ones who fit your EPC profile. But if you're a complex mortgage customer, my market, you're already fishing in a very small pool for which lenders we can assess and use for a client with complex case. And if this divides those lenders in two, there's just half the pool.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a call there for all lenders to make it clearer what you can do to help brokers. It's certainly something that we're looking at our own education series at the moment of, we see the questions we get and the mistakes our brokers make on applications and things like that. And there's a clear need for education, particularly around self-employment for one, but also if you're just saying there's opportunities to help landlords with getting the right deals for them in terms of linking to all these new efficiency standards, then we can do more. So that's something we'll look at. So one of the impacts of this, and there's a few other bits and bobs, but the Aldermore have recently done some research basically saying that a third of landlords are thinking about selling their properties. And it's not directly linked to MEES, but they're definitely, that will be, the concerns are around it's legislation, it's the Renters' Rights Bill, it's taxation, and then it's his final EPC kind of sword of Damocles as well. So what's your view, Dan, on that? How much is it going to impact the buy-to-let market?
Licensing as well. There's so many things. It seems every couple of years something new comes in to hit landlords. I've never heard it said, but it feels like someone is trying to get more properties onto the market for first-time buyers, which I understand that that's important. But people are allowed. We're a capitalist country. You are allowed to own more than one property. So it's difficult, isn't it? I think it has a huge impact on the market, and it's been alluded to already. But I think we're moving more and more and more towards a huge split between hobby landlords, accidental landlords, part-time landlords, and professional portfolio and corporate landlords, where people are able to take these things on as foreseen costs. People who own a number of properties can handle these things on almost like a bulk buy system. They get to know their contractors who help them on their properties, and you can deal with things. You can get better pricing on bulk, and it's seen as a business cost as well. So I think it's forcing people who have one or two additional properties to sell up. I've seen tons of that myself. Dealt with, I can think even recently of clients who maybe have 3 or 4. They're saying, I'm going to keep these 2, sell those 2.
Okay.
Okay. So I think there's a massive impact.
Yeah, I mean, and who's buying those? Is it first-time buyers or is it the portfolio landlord, the corporates?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
a bit of both? Because I still think, whilst portfolio landlord is definitely the most tax efficient and best route forward, and we've seen that, what was the stat? 60,000 SPVs for property ownership have been created in the last 12 months, taking the total to over 400,000 in the UK. So it's clearly that's the market. But 60% of the market is still privately owned landlords with the 1 or 2 properties that aren't classified. So it's interesting how that balance will change.
Really, while you're on that, Hamptons, I don't know if you saw the Hamptons research, was that buy-to-let firms now are the biggest business type in the UK. So there's 4 times more buy-to-let firms registered with Companies House than there is fast food shops.
Wow.
So this includes SPVs, someone who has
Yeah.
one property in a limited
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
SPV, a special purpose vehicle.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and also in there was that there's the number of companies holding property is 400% higher than it was in February 2016. Wow. So, that was when there was a lot of hammering of landlords in terms of there was the regulator with ICRs were increased around about that time. That's when the taxation, the tax relief started to be sort of hit. We've been talking down the buy-to-let market for years, but it's been remarkably resilient. But I think you're right. It's just becoming more professionalised. So your amateur hobby landlords, like you say, there's less of a place for those. I think you always have your accidental landlord who, like your expat, who wants to retain a foothold in the UK and now let it out, or the can't sell at the moment. And I think UK property is still a good bang for your buck as a long-term investment, particularly in times of global uncertainty as well. So there was those positive factors, but you're right. I think the weighting is now going more professionalised.
Definitely.
I don't see that
Absolutely.
changing. Yeah.
Well, excuse me. I mean, that the report goes on to say that 49% of landlords reporting a rise in tenant interest as well. So it's
That's
not
going to stay there, isn't it? The
it
demand
is.
is for tenanted property.
Absolutely.
Not going to go away.
Well, because it'd be interesting when we look at how the government looks to do affordability reform and how that releases the shackles a little bit for lenders to potentially borrow more. One of my biggest beefs is there's a lot of people who can afford a mortgage but are artificially stopped by regulation.
Yeah.
So we should have that removed. Lenders still need to demonstrate that they can lend affordably and responsibly, but let people borrow what they can.
Yeah.
That's a key one for me.
Well, the affordability assessment is based on a system that was based on much lower rates, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
How it was stressed. And interestingly, even this week, I've seen lenders announcing that they're bringing their stress system down or changing it completely.
We made ours.
Say,
we reduced ours. We were the first lender to do it 2 years ago to take the 3% to 2%.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we're looking at moving that even further, as well as a reform of the ONS data we use. So it is something that everybody's looking at. But their marginal gains, the difference is the LTI cap. How much physically can we use? I think once that is seen more sensibly, it was done for the right reasons, and arrears are nowhere near where they were in 2008.
Where they could have been.
Or where they could have been, and we've learned from that. Although repossessions are up, but that's because of COVID's court backlog. So it's an artificial up. It's just a load of backlog stuff. So that's interesting. So we need to sort that. Kind of forgotten where we were. So let's move on to any other last thoughts on the impact on buy-to-let or anything like that. I think we've covered that subject.
We just haven't mentioned the impact it has on rental prices, which is huge.
Well, please tell me about that then.
I don't rent, so it doesn't affect me personally. But I mainly deal with people who own property, so I don't hear from clients about rent affecting them particularly. But I've heard lots of people outside of my job just talking about the price of rent soaring, and it being multiple times higher than it was a few years ago, because it's the renters that the price ultimately gets passed on to.
And I've had a couple of instances where. Again, this is like more professionalism versus hobby amateur. You know, is that good or bad? I've heard one example in particular where actually they just haven't increased the rents for like 10 years. It's just like, you know, happy with the tenant.
Being kind.
And then they've suddenly gone, oh, need to sell up now. And then the tenant's gone out to find equivalent rent, and it's like double.
Massive.
And they're just like,
exactly that.
I'm going to be homeless because I can.
Yeah.
So there's more of that coming up.
That's
so,
a fair point.
The big gap is that I think the private rental sector has been plugging some of the gap that's been left by social.
That's a good point.
So the lack of social housing,
Yeah.
that's got to be addressed. I know it's been talked about, but you know, the most vulnerable in society need protection against fuel poverty and what we've been talking about, but also about that they need to be able to have roofs over their head, and that social housing has just been so sort of left, and the professional landlord rental sector has sort of covered that, but that's not sustainable.
No, agreed.
Actually, it says I've just reading the report again. 61% of private tenants have said that future rent hikes could force them to change their whole living situation, moving in with family, or seeking house shares because they physically can't cover it. So I think that's a really, really key thing. Whilst we're on the topic of throwing this at you guys, didn't brief you before, but renters' rental rights bill. Any thoughts on that? I'm not sure how much you think about it.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a balance because, like you were just saying, like private rented sector is covering some of the social side of things as well. So if you just make it less appealing for landlords in general, whether it's portfolio or hobbyists, and you reduce that supply, you're going to be in with it's going to cause more problems. So the renters that have got a great place to live and like maybe in social housing, they're fine, they're sorted. But then we're sort of penalising people who want to rent or can only rent, and not all of them can afford to buy either. So even if so that's a massive assumption, isn't it? They'll just buy the place. Well, that not necessarily.
Not always.
So I do think there needs to be a balance. I'm not sure it's necessarily got that at the moment, but
I wear two hats on this topic because morally, anyone renting that's their home and they should have rights. They should be looked after and protected. But then I wear a professional hat where I look after the landlords. And one of the key reasons I've seen people selling up is because they know that if they have a tenant who's not paying, it's now become even more difficult for them to rightfully evict someone who is not meeting their contract. Not struggling with it, in total breach, just refusing to pay. It was already difficult to deal with that situation as a landlord. And like I said, I've had people that's their primary reason for selling up. That's been the icing on the cake.
Yeah, well, it's this whole Section 21 removal. Removing the being able to kick people out for lots of reasons. But to implement that. When I was listening to something the other day, there are 100,000 Section 21 cases backlogged in court. So even if you put in this new reform, it's going to be years before it can be impacted because of the backlog to get into court to do anything. So, which is not great for tenants, but not great for the landlords either, who are taking lots of time and cost to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think all of this, if you're a dodgy renter or a dodgy landlord, yes, you've got something to fear in this. If you're not, then hopefully it should work effectively, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Cool. Right, so let's move on to a slightly different topic. And we always talk about our phrase of it's don't discount the discounted mortgage. Yeah. Okay. Because we live in a very strange world currently where certainty costs you less than taking a risk. So fixed rates are cheaper than variable rated products.
Mm.
So normally, if you're prepared, you don't want risk in the mortgage world, you pay for that. I want certainty. But we've got this crazy market and have had for quite a few years where variable rated products are far more expensive for lenders to price and to actually administer. So is now the time that we're seeing rates dropping and all the swaps and all the market predictions is rates dropping to consider discounted mortgage rates? I'll come to you first, Dan, as the broker in the room.
Not a simple question. And the first thing I would say is that if we're basing that question on where we've been for the last few years, where, like you say, you've got 3 tiers of pricing. You've got long-term fixed, let's call that 5 years the cheapest. You've got short-term fixed, 2-3 years being more expensive. And then you've got variable rates, the risk for the knowledgeable being the highest. That's not so much the case now. Generally speaking, that's still the case, but with far, far smaller increments. But with some lenders, I've seen 2, 3, 4, 5 year all priced at the same. I've seen variable even cheaper with some lenders. That's now different with every lender, but the gap seems to be smaller with everyone. Whether you should fix or whether you should go variable, for me, comes down to your financial level of comfort. If you have enough behind you to risk a variable rate and you feel that it's likely rates are coming down, then I think there's a conversation to be had there. If a fixed rate takes you to the very edge of your budget and affordability, leaving you just enough for rainy days and so on, then even if you think, this is what I would say to a client asking me this question, even if you think rates come down, how do you feel about the risk of a variable rate, which of course can go up? If you don't have surplus at the end of the month, a variable rate, wherever you think things might be going, puts you at risk. So I think it's a different question for a wealthy person, and it's a different question and a more difficult question for someone who would consider themselves not to be wealthy.
I agree. It's all about that ability to absorb payment increases, isn't it? For wealthier people, that's easier to cope with if you're not using all that income to live that mortgage. So that's the approach that I would use with it. Different, obviously, topic for you on that, but any thoughts on that from your perspective?
Yeah, I suppose coming back to the original, like the tariff discussion, there's a lot of uncertainty globally and in the market. So I think, obviously, it might be appropriate for some people, but I don't know. I think most people right now are probably heading towards certainty and probably want to fix, right? Obviously, depending on their circumstances and their willingness to absorb.
The majority still do. It's shifting a bit.
Yeah,
there's more people asking about variable than there were.
Yeah, interesting. Because it could literally, it's very unpredictable, isn't it? At the moment, Trump could come back and then suddenly interest rates rise again.
No, it is.
The variable rates were often maybe 1-2% higher than the fixed, so it was a huge gamble for someone who was certain rates were dropping,
absolutely.
Really.
That's
now
the madness.
It's a harder decision. Which is in some ways less helpful, because you had 3 clear choices before. Now the water's far muddier because the rates are so much closer. So it doesn't feel like a gamble to go from I recommended a variable. I can't mention a rate probably, but I mentioned a variable rate in the very low 5s yesterday. We were discussing that with a client. We weren't seeing that a year ago.
No. It's definitely balancing out, and now 2 years for the first time are cheaper than 5. We're maybe seeing a bit more of that equalisation. Phil, what do you think?
I think if we do have another. If we have another rate cut fairly soon, we probably need two more rate cuts or one bigger one. Then I think discounts will come into play far more. But I think it just needs lenders revert to rates, their standard variable rates, just to come down that notch more, because discounts are linked to that rather than. I know they are sort of indirectly related to the Bank of England, but lenders revert to rates need to come down a bit more. And most
consumers don't realise that.
No, they don't know that, and that's where
they
education.
think the Bank of England base rate goes down all variable
Yeah.
rates
Yeah.
go down
Yeah.
immediately, which just isn't the case.
And that's where the power of good, sensible, qualified advice comes into its own, rather than the mate down the pub. And that's, that's
And
why
I think
advice is so important.
because when rates started to drop and discounts became a thing, it's great to hear you explain it, because that's exactly how I would expect it. But we were having brokers asking us, how do I
Yes.
discuss a variable rate with my client?
Yeah.
Because the answer's just been 2 and 5 year fixed.
That's frightening.
But that's reality. We had a lot, so there's a lot of
There are a
there's
lot of mortgage brokers out there, though, aren't there?
There is a lot
There's
of
a
mortgage
lot.
brokers, and it's like a spectrum of anything. You've got some who are good, and or as they say, everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. So I think
Find
that's
a good one.
That's the balance.
Get
But, so it's very
recommendations.
much as Phil
Yeah.
said, and we always say, go and find a quality broker that gives you that advice. And you might not like what they tell you, and I think that's the key thing. We always
Yeah.
say, isn't it, Phil, that the key for me with advice to brokers is you haven't got to be nice and you just got to do things nicely, and you can tell your client you're not ready for this, or this isn't right for you. Rather than just going, oh, okay, and doing it. And that's great to hear that. Wow, look at the time. We are running out. So I just want to come to our last final question. I like a confidence factor question. So, a bit of preamble towards it. We've had a great one. The market's had a great Q1. Yeah. Largely driven by the stamp duty race to get there.
Yeah.
But a few other bits as Bob as well. Q2 has been a slower start for the market we've seen. We've spoken to a lot of lenders that have seen Q2 not as fast. I think naturally everybody's taken a breath after a mental 3 months. The battlefield seems to be where I predicted it would be this year. It's not so much about rate, it's more about criteria. As even mainstream lenders aren't fighting on rate, they're starting to come into the territory of your specialists and your complex lenders like ourselves. And Phil, I think you uncovered a great stat from the other day where there's been more criteria changes in the market in the last 2 months than in the preceding 24.
That stacks up.
So let's go to, what do you think, Dan? What's your confidence factor in the market at the moment?
I feel like people have accepted that rates are where they are. I think we've had so many changes in the market where people have said, "I'll wait to see what happens next." And personally, with me and my clients, I don't feel that's where people are now. I think people are saying, "I'm fed up with waiting for the next thing. I've got needs and I'm going to address them with the right advice and the right lender and the right solution." So I'm seeing people make decisions. I'm seeing people make moves. I'm seeing people just get on with it, really, I think. And I expect to see a lot of people. I mainly do a remortgage, purchase, complex remortgage. I'm certainly seeing people cracking on with their refinances that they need now, whether that's people for their home, whether that's business owners or commercial mortgages or whatever. I'm seeing, and buy-to-lets, I'm seeing people make decisions now.
Good.
I just hope the orange man doesn't bring in too much uncertainty and make people hold back and not do what they need to get on with.
I think that's the key. But it's good to hear that people we've talked about the new normal for 2 years now in terms of interest rates, but finally the penny's landed, isn't it? I think
It's not going to be where it was.
No, absolutely.
It shouldn't have been there in the first
History proves that. Luke, your thoughts on confidence?
I agree with Dan, but sort of coming back to my earlier point, I do think it's, how can the government manage the impact of that global fallout, and will it mean job losses? In which case, it's not just people aren't going to be moving if they're losing their jobs, right? But if we can sort of steer clear or mitigate job losses, I think people will just start to crack on, keep on with life basically, and refinance, get mortgages, buy new homes, etc. So I think that's the major variable. How does the country and the government react and keep stable, consistent? Will there need to be a stimulus? That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's the sort of the variable for me. So confident, that's what. Yeah, I think there will be a lot of confidence depending on what we do. I think at the moment people are sort of like, what's happening here with the orange man? And and sort of like holding fire. So I think at the moment it's probably maybe a bit slower, but hopefully it will pick up again when.
Okay.
Yeah.
Phil, last words for you.
Yeah, I think the Bank of England needs to be bold and make an early rate cut of 0.5%. That's what I would like to see, because I just think that would just help prevent us going into recession, maybe give businesses a bit more confidence as well. So if borrowing costs are a bit lower as well, and that's, as you say, stimulus, I think is important. And back to my point at the start of this conversation, is there's a lot of refinance opportunities, 379 billion this year refinance. So for mortgage brokers, there's still a lot to be optimistic about. So stay close to your clients. That's my advice to mortgage brokers, and give them really good advice. Don't just take orders, advise and steer them in the right direction.
And you have to remember that the security for everything we're discussing here, mortgages, is British property, which has survived so many things in the last 5 years. I'm not going to name them all. Brexit, trust economics, you'd name the rest. But British property moves up and down a little bit, but it has stayed stronger than I think most of us thought.
Yeah. So above all, we are cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
But we'll wait for the Satsuma to decide our fate. Good.
Yeah.
On that note, everybody, that time has absolutely flown by. So thank you to all of our guests, Luke,
thanks for having us.
Dan, and Phil. Look out for our socials announcing this going live on the 1st of May. Please do follow us on LinkedIn, and don't forget to follow us on your favourite channel. Do that so you can get notified when the next episode of The Mortgage Conversation is ready to be aired. So Apple Podcast or Spotify or whatever your favourite ones, but if you want to watch it, then Spotify is probably your best option. But as I always say, do not watch it if you are driving or using heavy machinery. Please just listen to it. Well, that's it from me. Goodbye from everybody, and see you next time.